On a surface level, there's a lot of similarity between Doom 3, Quake 4, and Prey. They share the same id Tech 4 engine. They share the same basic aesthetic, metal corridors with fleshy tumors busting out. They share the same linear, level-by-level progression. But each one has a totally different structural approach to what often feels like the same set of building blocks. Doom 3 was a lonely, horror-focused title setting a Martian space marine against a demonic invasion. Quake 4 was a squad-themed military campaign against the predatory Strogg aliens who use humans for parts. Prey is the story of a Cherokee army veteran single-handedly defeating an alien invasion of Earth after they abduct him from the reservation bar he's in. Doom 3 crafted claustrophobic environments designed to create constant anxiety and paranoia. Quake 4 made wandering set-piece levels meant to spur a constant state of action. Prey creates bizarre level-long navigation puzzles, with portals, gravity switching, size shifting, and even a secondary spirit world where obstacles might appear differently. Out of the entire family of games made using the id Tech 4 engine, Prey is the weirdest, the most creative. Its design choices are unusual, from the arsenal to the pace of combat to the overwhelming dedication to creating a really alien environment. Prey is more playful than its peers in pretty much every aspect of its design. Its originality is one of the things that led to its being mostly forgotten. It didn't have the franchise name power of the other games, and it played a lot differently. For one, the player is exceptionally fragile. You can only take a few hits before dying on the default difficulty, and for another, ammunition is scarce. The game only has a few weapons and is consistently using scarcity to prompt you to switch between them. It's much more pronounced than even in survival horror-influenced Doom 3. But the easiest way to shake out the stylistic differences between these games is to look at how the games begin. Doom 3 has you spending about an hour winding down through a Martian research base, populated for now, listening to frightened whispers and foreshadowing what's to come. Quake 4 has a big, cinematic planetfall sequence followed by immediate action as you look for what's left of your squad. Prey begins with its main character looking in the mirror of the bar bathroom, screwing up the courage to ask his girlfriend to leave the reservation with him. As you head back to the bar, your grandfather gives you a dire warning of terrors to come, but in the meantime, you can play fully interactive video poker and blackjack, you can adjust the jukebox and change the track and the volume, you can chat with Jen, your girlfriend at the bar, and then you can get a brief combat tutorial by beating up two bikers with a wrench when they get rowdy and insulting. This is actually taken seriously by the game. Tommy, the main character, could absolutely go to jail for it, but then the green lights descend from the sky, suck up the trucks in the parking lot, tear the roof off the bar, and pull everyone away from petty concerns like assault and battery. The aliens have arrived. The dark harvest has begun. Prey isn't a masterpiece. It's trying way too many things at once, and they don't always land in a sensical way. But I've got to admire Prey's willful creativity for a game of its particular pedigree. Doom 3 was technically oriented, dedicated to showing off the engine that ran it, tooling its gameplay to best favor the technology. Quake 4 was a direct sequel to Quake 2, ignoring the frenetic multiplayer-first gameplay of the third Quake, in favor of the most traditional gameplay of all the id Tech 4 titles. Prey owes nothing to no one and proceeds to push the engine in entirely different directions than Doom 3, preferencing disorientation to fear in the atmosphere. In the first hour of the game, it introduces you to its portal mechanics in a way that's quietly unforgettable. A crate tips over and an enemy pops out, so you crawl into the portal and seamlessly appear in a room with a tiny rocky sphere in a glass box. Another portal crate sits on the other side of the room, and when you pass through that, you appear on top of the sphere inside the glass box. An alien guard walks in, appearing to be stories tall, notices you, and then comes through the portal to hunt you down, tiny style. It's a very different kind of vibe than anything its peers would try. It's goofier and wilder. Or consider one of the game's most standout puzzles. A series of cubes whirl around, assembling themselves into a larger hollow cube. You become trapped inside as soon as you advance into a nearby portal. To escape, you have to change the gravity in the cube over and over, swapping wall for ceiling and ceiling for floor. This allows you to draw a power cube through a track that winds all around the puzzle room. It's like manipulating a lock's tumbler while being inside the lock. And this sort of straightforward non-combat puzzle is par for the course in Prey. About once a level, usually much more often, it throws some subtle and tricky obstacle in your path that requires no shooting whatsoever to engage with. The point of them is to make the sphere, the alien craft, seem as genuinely alien and impossible as they can. Prey succeeds in that. Wall walking is a common occurrence in the game, and when the game isn't making mazes that wind all across the walls and ceilings, they're having you fight out combat encounters while hanging upside down. In its best moments, the combat feels like shooting your way through a glossy, knockoff M.C. Escher painting. Portals open up above, below, to the sides, across the room, tossing a handful of enemies at you at once, and considering Tommy's surprising fragility, responding quickly to that kind of all-angles attack in an environment with so many weird and confusing angles is tricky and engaging at the same time. The combat may be broadly familiar, the level may be ultimately linear, but the creative novelty of Prey's level design still shines through 11 years later. It's not until a couple years later, when puzzlers like the Portal games hit the scene, that you see this kind of exploratory aesthetic being expanded on, and with the Portal series, the whole context and approach is just completely different. Perhaps the most charmingly distinct thing that Prey does is with its arsenal and the pacing of combat. Often when games present you with alien weapons, they don't really seem all that alien. For every game like Half-Life Opposing Force that'll give you guns that are squishy, weird, and unpredictable, you get 3 games where alien means the same old assault rifles and shotguns, but fancier and sometimes with lasers, maybe. Prey only gives you a single human weapon, a wrench. Beyond that, you get a good half-dozen more weapons that have satisfyingly useful dual functions. Each is equally powerful. Besides the wrench, you'll still be using every one of your weapons in the last stages of the game. You'll probably chew through ammunition for all of them in the final boss fight. Each gun is designed with a specific tactic and environment in mind. In a linear shooter like this, guns take on huge importance in constructing the feel of the game. By making all the guns powerful, all of them useful, while at once making the player fragile, gives everything a weighty, punchy feel. Constantly switching weapons out of tactical need or because of scarcity keeps things from getting monotonous. I sometimes have a habit of leaning on just a couple weapons that I enjoy in a shooter, forgetting about the rest. It takes a deliberate action on the developer's part to get me to branch out. Prey accomplishes that naturally, by making the guns part of the alien ecosystem and not just the primary means of blasting through it. The most powerful rapid-fire gun you get is by slicing it off the hand of a gigantic enemy, and it wriggles angrily in your grip as you hold it and fire it. The simplest gun switches from semi-automatic for close range to a heat vision sniper mode that you can only fire a few times before running out of weapon fire. There's a gun that pulls its power from the walls of the sphere, and different power outlets make the gun function differently, from slow-moving red globs of damage to arcs of lightning that jump across the room in an instant. All of them incorporate some sort of organic element. Most of them are creatures of a sort themselves. All of them make a certain sort of sense for the environment. This is the kind of deep design that brings the promise of the title to life. You are nothing but a hunted animal, and survival is a matter of besting the aliens on their own turf, with their own tools. In Doom, it didn't matter if you were in the bowels of hell, you were still going to find some chain gun bullets. This is a totally different aesthetic, and a wonderfully cohesive creative foundation for all the shooting you do. Even when your grandfather calls you to the spirit realm, and things take a turn for the seriously peculiar. The 2006 Prey is also a notable title for one of the most unexpected reasons. It's one of the first AAA titles to actively pursue the cooperation of actual Native Americans when incorporating them into a piece of fluff pop art. The biggest, most obvious complaint about Native representation in games, and pop media in general, is that every Indian nation gets thrown together in one big swirling cliché that comes out either condemnatory or condescending. On the surface, Prey seems like it's going to veer in that direction when Grandfather starts spouting off his cryptic warnings at the bar, dressed in his traditional regalia. But there's 2 key storytelling details that do redeem Prey, even if the cheese of it is intractably baked into the production. The first is that Tommy's a grounded character, much more robust and real than the Space Marines of Prey's peers. Tommy's got dreams and flaws, and he reacts to events in a way that flows relatively naturally. Plus, he's voiced by Native American voice talent, Michael Greyeyes. The second thing is that all the stuff in the game with Tommy's ghost falcon, the wisdom of the spirit world and his grandfather's ghost, the visual motifs that Prey uses to characterize its Native American segments, dreamlike as they are, all of this is actually based specifically in Cherokee culture, their symbols, their mysticism. All of the silly sci-fi stuff is obviously thrown in, but Prey was unusually progressive for the time by reaching out to the Cherokee and seeking help on making sure the Native experience portrayed is at least grounded in something real and not just made up wholesale based on the vague idea of what the First Peoples are supposed to be like. There's really only one guarantee against mishandling the inclusion of minority characters, and that's actually speaking to and consulting with members of the minority you're including. The game takes the whole thing rather seriously, all things considered. The primary character arc for Tommy has him starting off in that Oklahoma bathroom as a man with no faith and no community, and he ends the game as someone who saved the Earth because he was willing to listen to his grandfather and use his spirituality as an actual in-game tool and weapon. It's fun to see Native culture extended into a sci-fi setting this way. Within Prey's fiction, the aliens of the sphere have seeded Earth as a pantry world to come and harvest when the time was right. There have been smaller harvests in the past, specifically the mass abduction and ingestion of the Anasazi cultures of the Four Corners area. I'm traveling through the American West at the moment, and the disappearance of the Anasazi people is a pervasive and deeply bizarre mystery. Historians and archaeologists haven't come up with anything better than, maybe there was an especially intense drought for why these cultures would abandon their cliff cities so completely in such an extremely short time frame. Prey supposes that not only were they abducted, but that they managed to persist within the sphere, hiding in the walls and causing mischief where possible. Tommy follows in their footsteps. As cheesy as the gamified mysticism of Prey's desire to have a native protagonist and put Earth's fate not in the hands of a stubbly white space marine, but in those of a skeptical, no-nonsense Cherokee mechanic, is one more category of many where Prey is willing to be more creative than the average corridor shooter. Mixing up native spirituality with a freewheeling pulp sci-fi aesthetic yields an unpredictable, messy result, however. For example, Grandfather Anisi's death. That's a good one. There's a big alien contraption that's stabbing into captured humans, tearing out organs, draining blood, and then melting away the rest in a hiss of steam. You see it happen to a procession of strangers, the machine taking a while to reset between victims. Then you pass around into another room and come back to the other side of the machine, and there's Anisi. There's nothing you can do to spare him a totally brutal death, and Anisi faces it with a lot of dignity, even as foot-diameter needles gouge out his flesh. Later, Tommy takes a terrible fall only to wake up and see Anisi again in the spirit world. Unlike most shooters, you don't have to reload your game when you die, you simply return here, to the spirit world. You can shoot a bow at lost spirits to absorb their power, refilling your bars for when you pop out into the material world again, picking up exactly where you were when you died. On one level, this is an absurdly silly gamification of Cherokee motifs. On another, it creates a gameplay pace that's slightly unique from any other shooter I've played. It functionally takes longer to do the Lost Spirit minigame than it does to simply reload a saved game, but doing it this way also never breaks the momentum of play in quite the same way that a game over and a reload does. You just transition briefly to another place where you can prepare yourself to try again, and then you're immediately right back at it with no gameplay lost to reloading. You move forward more relentlessly this way, with deaths acting more like a quiet pool along the river's current, letting you rest a brief moment before heading back into the rapids. I loved it mechanically, even if it's a pretty iffy use of thematic material. But there's a lot about how the spirit world is included in Prey that simply is not explained, including a big chunk of side plot that simply gets discarded in favor of the simpler concern of going after Jen. Namely, somehow Tommy brought angry ghosts aboard the sphere. The dumbest thing in the game is these ghosts, who kill children and then assume their form. Seriously, the game makes a point of showing a couple of abducted orphans get gruesomely slaughtered by the ghost, at which point their angry spirits turn on you. Mechanically, they're wildly annoying to fight. Creatively, there's nothing about them as weird or wonderful as the environment or the weapons. It's just like someone said, how about ghosts? And everyone agreed, why not? The mercifully infrequent scenes with the child ghosts are as subtle as a haunted house at a county fair. You get a school bus with ghostly light shining out the windows, precipitating a ghost ambush. More memorable is how the game handles Jen. In some ways, she's a complete non-character, existing only to scream in fright and provide motivation. But she's used in a way that's just classic horror sci-fi. On account of your ties with the spirit world, the mother, the alien at the heart of the sphere, takes an interest in you. When the mother realizes that Jen is important to you, she begins to completely and deliberately fuck with you. She challenges you to climb a huge spire. After a brutal succession of difficult levels, the mother shows you how far you've progressed, maybe a tenth of the way. But she sportingly agrees to take you to the top of the tower, where she's got something that she's pretty sure is going to break Tommy's spirit for good. The game has you fight human-alien hybrids before this scene, so you can probably guess what's coming. Like Sarge in Doom 3, you must kill a gigantic organic tank made out of someone you know. It's not in and of itself very original. What sells it is how delighted the mother is to create such a painful and bizarre situation for Tommy. As a moment of triumph for the villain, it's one that lands well despite the cheese. Prey's strength is all tied up in these minute details of characterization and aesthetic that charm and surprise. If we just showed screenshots of Prey to someone mixed up with the id Tech 4 family of games, it'd be hard to pick Prey out of the lineup if you weren't already familiar. But in the playing of it, there's so many deeply personal, hilariously quirky touches put in by Human Head Studios that Prey begins to stand out more and more the deeper you get into it. The most emblematic thing I can think of when thinking about Prey's unique take on the alien abduction story is the choice to anchor the plot with Art Bell AM radio segments. I don't know what the overlap is between fans of Bell's legendary coast-to-coast AM show and mid-2000s PC shooter fans, but this particular detail won me over on the game completely. When I first turned 18 and started taking long road trips, I often spent the 1 a.m. to 2 a.m. hour listening to Bell's deep, excitable voice discuss alien abductions, invasions, body snatchings, and more. It was the absolute single best way to while away time in that situation. I'll remember Bell's voice all my life on account of those night drives, and here he is in this offbeat shooter taking calls from all around the U.S., slowly putting together a picture of the invasion in progress. One radio segment plays while a human, escaped from his cage and wild with shock and trauma, rocks nervously back and forth while Bell casually throws skepticism on the caller's account of lights in the sky. Up here, far above Art Bell and the sleeping world, the two of you know better. Coast to Coast AM grounds Prey in the rural weird of the American West quicker and better than almost any other reference I can think of. Playing Prey 11 years after its release, I'm shocked by how much I relate to these little human touches. The first Prey made me nostalgic for 2006 in an unexpectedly powerful way, hitting me much stronger than it did the first time I played the game. It's so much a part of its particular era, in its references and in its creative ambition. The world has moved on since Prey 2006, yet the game has stayed sharp on account of its almost flippant devotion to its very specific vibe. The endgame gets even crazier, with Tommy reaching the mother only to become her replacement, following the revelation that the mother was once a human warrior like Tommy. Tommy's tempted by the limitless power of the sphere, but rejects it when Anisi's ghost counsels him on the folly of it. So Tommy pilots the whole damn thing into the sun, which would have been a pretty great ending, but Prey wants to loop itself. It begins in the bar, it features the bar again, its pieces jumbled up in the digestive tract of the alien ship, and then it ends with Tommy unpacking boxes in a newly rebuilt bar. A radio talks about the government's refusal to acknowledge that the invasion even occurred, and then the leader of the space Anasazi, Eloise, appears in a portal behind you. She invites you through. Here at the end, it's resolved. Tommy is going to leave the reservation after all. Prey Will Continue fades in on the screen as a hilariously generic bro rock track plays in the background of the credits. Of course, now we know Prey would not continue. At least not in a way remotely associated with Damasi Tuwodi's interstellar exploits. It wouldn't be until 2017 that another Prey game would come out, and then it would be a completely different developer with a completely different structural approach. Prey 2006 is a corridor shooter through and through, although creative in the details. Prey 2017, on the other hand, is a deliberate attempt to revive the mechanics of System Shock 2. I'm not kidding. Slides of a PowerPoint presentation from early in Prey 2017's development specifically brings up the 1999 title. This is even stranger when you consider that the first Prey was in development from 1995 all the way through 2006. Each Prey has, more or less, had a tortuously convoluted 11-year development cycle, which perhaps had something to do with how willfully weird both games are. The first Prey began life back when whimsy was a little more welcome in a AAA game pitch, but the 2006 Prey that came from it did more or less resemble this original idea. The 2017 Prey isn't even aesthetically linked to the original. It's drawing from references on the complete opposite side of the first-person shooter family tree. System Shock and Doom were the grandfathers of their respective subgenres, and it is a hell of a thing to have both subgenres within a single franchise. Human Head originally wanted to follow up the 2006 Prey with a sequel where you played Tommy again, a direct continuous sequel, but then they shifted perspectives. Human Head's Prey 2 was originally supposed to be about a U.S. Marshal aboard the airliner you saw crash in the first game. He would somehow escape the sphere and wind up as a bounty hunter in a Blade Runner-inspired alien city. Recently, Eurogamer talked to Human Head developers more specifically about what their original vision for the sequel was supposed to be. What's amazing about that video is that the game that Human Head was making actually largely came to fruition under the new developer Arkane, just with all the details changed. Human Head's Prey was going to feature a gigantic, complex urban environment that the player would have to continuously navigate, performing primary and side activities. It was already going to ditch the corridor shooter format. Arkane's Prey takes place exclusively aboard the Talos 1, a space station orbiting the moon. It's done in a bright mid-century modernism instead of an 80s cyberpunk style, but the structural focus is the same. Human Head's Prey 2 was going to heavily rely on an amnesiac main character, missing stretches of their past and only putting together a cohesive picture of their situation at the very end of the game. Arkane's Prey did the same, constantly pulling the rug out from under the player as they try to understand how Talos 1 rose and fell. In a Polygon article about the development process that led from Tommy walking out on his unopened bar and into deep space adventure all the way to Morgan Yu's untrustworthy Morgan wake-up call, Rafael Colantonio, who was Arkane's lead designer for the game, said, quote, "The name is cool, and there was a match for the high-level concepts, which eventually, after some thought, made sense. It's just that the types of games they made back then and the types of games that we make are so different, it's hard to directly compare them, other than the theme." End quote. That's one of the things that makes the 2017 Prey such a remarkable and unusual title. It is thoroughly modern in its production, but I struggle to think of a modern title so openly in dialogue with the way games were made back then. As far as gameplay is concerned, Prey and System Shock 2 are seamless. If you've played the 1999 space horror game, you're ready for the slightly more paranoid and pensive 2017 space horror game, and vice versa. Each has a gigantic, complex, complete area composed of interconnected levels. Each features dense, individual levels, with rooms walled off by skills and secrets, accommodating several approaches for accessing the different areas. Each game has a mix of mundane and exotic weapons, with expensive and rare ammunition making each combat encounter costly and tense. Each game provides hidden routes through their sci-fi labyrinths. Each game relies on the player's curiosity to uncover what's going on, through the logs of those whose bodies now litter the halls. Each game even features a tree of psionic powers, whose use is monitored on a purple bar. You even pick up a wrench as your first weapon in both games, a nod towards either the Shock series or towards the 2006 Prey. What's cool about this explicit mechanical referencing of the System Shock series is that the Shock franchise was careening on an opposite trajectory around the time of the 2006 Prey's release. BioShock took an axe to the complicated upgrade and inventory systems of System Shock, leaning instead on the persistent arsenals more common to the corridor shooter family tree. Although the environment was still interconnected, you didn't return to levels quite the same way in BioShock like you did in System Shock 2. You didn't make full use of the whole environment the same way. Rooms weren't gated behind skills like they used to be. There weren't hidden layers to the levels. It was a much more streamlined, straightforward Shock. BioShock 2 was a bit more complex in the environment, but still leaned on the philosophy that the immediate interactive experience was more important than the more abstracted, systems-based exploration of its predecessors. It was BioShock Infinite, though, that was the controversial one. It had finally crossed from one side of the first-person family tree to the other. Although it was arena-based and not identifiably a corridor shooter exactly, it had more or less completely transitioned out of the system-centric immersive sim subgenre and over to the story-driven shooter subgenre. The approach most developers seemed to take at the time was that simplification broadened a potential audience. Arkane's 2017 Prey is the first time I've seen a major release so blatantly push back the other direction. It's a genre swapper, as much as BioShock Infinite, but the exact opposite direction, taking a name known for something linear and filling it to the absolute limit with complex interactive systems and storytelling. The one area where BioShock does surpass System Shock is in the complexity of the art. Rapture's Art Deco undersea skyscrapers are completely unforgettable. The freedom of a game to use architectural and artistic disciplines like Art Deco or modernism in scales and contexts that would be impossible in the real world, prohibitively expensive for movie set designers, is really remarkable in contrast to other mediums. A book can describe, but for this kind of thing it's more impactful to be shown, and for the player to see it at the careful and slow pace of the immersive sim showcases an aesthetic most of all. So, Prey 2017 has the best of both Shocks, the grandeur and artistic playfulness of Rapture, with the mechanical complexity of navigating the Von Braun. On top of all that is Arkane's distinctively contemporary touch in the presentation, emphasizing the human lives of the living and dead aboard Talos 1 over their deaths, telling a story about greed and humanity where it could just be about dark corridors and scary monsters more straightforwardly and easily. The 2017 Prey is just as creative as the 2006 one, just in completely different directions. So what were the high-level concepts that Colantonio thought linked the 2006 Prey with the 2017 one? Obviously I can't speak for Colantonio, but I can speak for myself. I think there's three chief ways the two titles resonated with each other, despite their massive divergence in style, substance, and structure. The first is the weapons. Not so much in the design and look of the weapons. The new Preys are all human-made and human-centric. They won't get any bile on you at all while you're shooting them. But what is consistent is how useful each tool remains from when you pick them up all the way through the endgame. What's consistent is how ammunition scarcity drives the player to get as creative as possible with each weapon in the arsenal. While Prey 2006 had an arsenal that was organic, and Prey 2017 has one that's clinical, both are deeply tied to the environment that you find the weapons in. Instead of the creepy, crawly carbines of the sphere, everything in Prey 2017 has kind of a whiz-bang prototype feel, assembled in a lab from available parts and not remotely ready for mass production. The guns are even environmentally useful. The glue gun is the most iconic and fun of the game. It goops a creature in place long enough for you to run away or deal with it. But more, its sticky puffballs can be used to make stairs and ledges, enabling a player to move vertically in the environment in a lot of unusual ways and bypass entryways that are blocked by tests of skill. Or take the recycler charge. It's a grenade that pulls everything in its blast radius towards a tiny point, shreds it, and then regurgitates it as material to use in the nanofabrication machines. Using a clutch of these weird little grenades, I turned the most powerful monster in the game into usable, redeemable materials. But you can use these grenades navigationally as well, literally recycling objects too heavy to move that might be blocking doorways. The disruptor pistol, on the other hand, is a weak little thing, but it's the only way to save the lives of mind-controlled humans by incapacitating them before they can run at you. There's even a Nerf gun, with no combat value at all, that can be used to remotely open doors. The Q-beam causes human and alien alike to melt into green puddles on the ground. All of these weapons and tools are hugely likable, hugely useful tools of destruction, and you end up finding situations that call for every single individual tool. Nothing is useless, nothing is wasted, not even the Nerf gun. Another point of commonality among Preys is the use of confusion and disorientation as a driving force in the game. The 2006 Prey is all about spatial disorientation, with its constant playfulness with the level design. The 2017 Prey is much more about mental disorientation. The plot opens with Morgan waking up in a brightly lit Earth apartment. But it's a total illusion. You're in a soundstage on Talos 1. You've been living this day over and over again, your memory being reset every time one of the many experimental neuromods you're developing are taking in or out. You don't know yourself. You don't know where you are. You don't know the truth behind the neuromods yet. The answers to all those questions mutate and shift as the plot rolls around. Plus, the monsters themselves are meant to instill more distrust and more dread. The mimics, as they're called, imitate two things: everyday objects and the people they kill. People, the mimics are bad at. They're walking shadows, boiling and strange. But objects, the mimics can perfectly imitate. The very first time you see a mimic in the game, it pretends to be a man's coffee cup before mercilessly attacking him. But before it does, there's a moment of brow-furrowing worry on the scientist's part. Wait, is this his coffee? It's that moment where you know that something is off, but you haven't put your finger on it yet, that makes Arkane's Prey most interesting of all. One of the most influential science fiction TV shows the past few years is Black Mirror, a vignette series that's notable for taking some facet of modern technology or media and then spinning it off in its darkest possible direction. What's really remarkable about it is how cuttingly immediate it feels. I'm sure this might lead to it aging poorly, but it articulates a series of modern fears that older sci-fi didn't see coming. The 2017 Prey has a huge resonance with Black Mirror's vibe. Like a good episode, it's got a twist on the twist that recontextualizes the whole early experience. Like a good episode, its danger and paranoia are tied to a modern trend whose consequences are just becoming clear. In years past, it was the government who did the nefarious science. The era of the space program, the atom bomb, it was scientific progress with a federal budget and a national goal. You can see an echo of big government as a scientific villain in Half-Life, which is, at its core, an extremely traditional sci-fi setup. Then there's the rise in the 80s and 90s of the corporation as the villain, but it's always a big nefarious conglomerate, dark, industrial, a cyberpunk dream of what oppression in the future will look like. The TranStar Corporation in Prey is notably different. For one, they're not really portrayed very cynically. A great deal of Prey is learning the stories of the individuals who lived and worked on Talos 1, and very few of them would fit the boilerplate definition of a bad person. They have Dungeons & Dragons groups, they fall in love, they make stop-action movies in their cabins, they have friendly rivalries and close friendships. They all believe in what they're doing, pushing the frontiers of science. Their offices are spacious and beautiful, with no sign of the tortured cubicle drone motif that evil corporations in the sci-fi of decades past might include. TranStar is a corporation with the ethics of the modern startup. They treat their employees well. They care about aesthetics and beauty. They care about branding. They're also sacrificing prisoners to inhuman shape-shifting monsters from the depths of space so that they can harvest the very useful materials inside the monsters' bodies, but, they're pretty good to work for altogether. This exotic material, Typhon material, led to the development of the neuromod, which allows the injection of skills and attributes directly into the eyeball. Learn piano, levitate tables, anything and everything to make you smart and powerful and interesting, and all you need is money to buy the neuromod. They unlocked the human potential by shooting bits of alien biomass into the brain. Even if things hadn't gone wrong in the traditional running and screaming sense, it would have created new layers of human inequality, further divisions between the rich and poor. More, it involves literally sacrificing the undesirables to monsters so that the monsters can breed. All the likable people you learn about over the course of the game, particularly yourself, are complicit in these crimes. On the surface, TranStar is an open and ethical employer. They treat employees with great dignity and respect, employ top talent from around the world, appear, from a public relations standpoint, to be flawless. And yet, Talos 1 is no Rapture, hiding its creative talent away from the world because the world wouldn't understand. It's the shining star on top of humanity's Christmas tree. The best science, working in the interests of the richest people. Your brother Alex frequently talks idealistically about humanity's future and how important it is to preserve the work being done, but humanity as a whole would never really benefit. Cruelty to many is done in the name of convenience for the few. Today it's small examples, Uber using advanced software to hide from regulators and shortchange its drivers, or Facebook using algorithms to identify low self-esteem individuals for targeted advertisements, but if something like the Typhon ever was discovered, would it be sour old men in heavily decorated army uniforms arguing over its use? Or would it be selfish young geniuses in jeans and button-up shirts? There's so much excellent flavor text in the game, but my favorite is an excerpt of an article about the space elevator. Humans could build more than one elevator and trigger a golden age of exploration, but the company that controls the space elevator has shut down every competitor to keep their prices high. Human progress, as Prey sees it, is not a march to the top for all humanity, it's a race to see who can get to the future first, because they will surely be able to sell tickets to all the schmucks suddenly stuck living in the past behind them. The game is so much more about these themes than the Typhon themselves. The Typhon are beautifully designed, genuinely unsettling and truly alien, but it's the human element that has the focus in Prey. That's why the Typhon are so perfect an enemy. They literally fade into the background while you're exploring. You have to take it room by room, and each room has a purpose and a story. Sometimes the story is complicated, like where you learn how the Typhon are made, and sometimes it's simple, like, oh, I used a neuromod to make me a better hacker, and now I can reach the storeroom I couldn't get into an hour ago and get the materials I need not to die. Arkane stakes its studio's reputation on the complexity of their level design. In Dishonored 1 and 2, the levels were absolutely massive and tremendously intricate, but not strictly interconnected. Once you left a level, you didn't come back. This is Arkane's opportunity to make a single environment with 30 hours or more of exploration to be done. Prey is, structurally, a hugely traditional game. It's an extension of what they were doing with Dishonored 2, with an even more deliberately backwards-looking design. Except it's refined by storytelling techniques that are identifiably Arkane's, namely using action as the sole means of characterizing the protagonist. That was Dishonored's incredible hook. Corvo Attano could either be a good man clearing his name, or the monster of vengeance that everyone thinks that he is, all dependent on how the player behaves mechanically, if they make the gameplay effort as the player to create more compassionate outcomes. Prey does the same, in a way that's a little more subtle without being so explicitly part of the mechanical structure as was in Dishonored. You have the option to help people or ignore them or even kill them. No one is so important that they can't die, and keeping everyone alive is a lot of extra work. Yet the climax is almost entirely centered around how you solve these conundrums and if you care about the humans of Talos 1 or not. There's even a whole chunk of ending dependent on if you refuse to kill a late-game villain. A company fixer from TranStar shows up to kill everyone aboard the station and erase evidence of the company's misdoings. You can incapacitate him, rely on someone else you saved to drag him across the station, and remove his neuromods. This causes amnesia for him like it did for you. He recognizes you as an executive when he comes out of the fog, and will help evacuate everyone left alive with the shuttle he came in on. If you don't give him the mind wipe, however, no one goes home. Unless, of course, you discover the secret escape pod of your brothers, and then maybe just you can. But if you want to leave behind all those people to die, go for it. Prey doesn't just give you multiple solutions for navigation, exploration, combat. There's always another ethical solution as well, and none of it so obvious as BioShock's little sisters. Prey 2017 is bold enough to let the player choose without a prompt, to give them the option to act without immediately casting judgment if they don't. In all ways, this is the distillation of what worked best about the Shock games, meaningful human choices coupled with fiendishly subtle environments. Morgan's key code to his office is 0451, the developer in-joke that signifies that a game is generally based around these values, first featured in the original System Shock. Deus Ex references 0451. Both Dishonored's have 0451. Even BioShock Infinite prominently features the reference. Infinite has one single interactive lock, and that's the code for it, 451. 0451 was as relevant to BioShock Infinite as an appendix, a purposeless vestige of what went before. But the 2017 Prey is like a cloned mammoth, the real deal, whole and alive and impressively huge. Its only real flaw is that the endgame unfolds at an awkwardly fast pace, throwing combat encounters at you much quicker than you explore new areas, draining out your ammunition and resources and leading to a kind of inventory-driven difficulty hike in the game's last few hours. The combat in Prey is honestly the least engaging part about it. The gun variety is phenomenal, but Prey's tendency to repopulate areas with tougher enemies when you're re-exploring them, after you've already scavenged what you can for most of the level, tanks the mechanical pacing. As time goes on, things get worse and worse on the station. And meanwhile, you keep having these visions of a room with Alex and of somewhere mysterious, deep in space. In a general sort of way, the twist is depressingly predictable. As soon as you break out of your simulated apartment, both my friend Mitty, who was also playing the game, and I said to each other, "It's not going to be a simulation within a simulation, is it?" Well, it is. But after thinking it over, I'm actually fundamentally very satisfied with how this ending ties everything in Prey together. You essentially have two direct choices for the endgame, which vary slightly depending on decisions you've made, like making the shuttle ready for escape or not. Either blow up the station and the giant Typhon mother organism that's wrapped itself around it, or use a device of Morgan's own creation that uses the Typhon neural network to electrocute all the Typhon at once, preserving the station. If you blow it up, that's it. You go home. Or die. One or the other. If you preserve it, Alex gives a postscript about how the work will continue, and everyone will look back on them as the ones who finally grasped immortality. And then credits. But all the good stuff is in the surprise post-credits wrap-up. The whole idea behind neuromods is that the Typhon could be used to make humans into something more, but that something was increasingly just the Typhon. Maybe a multiplying creature didn't leave the station, but TranStar sold the world a product where they directly injected aliens into their eyeballs. They brought the Typhon to Earth already in 1,000 tiny doses, and destroyed it. The world's been long over, and the Typhon neural network weaves between the abandoned skyscrapers. Alex Yu is still alive, trying to fix the mistake he made as best he can, and what he's done is reverse his work. He's abandoned trying to augment humanity with the Typhon. Now he's trying to augment the Typhon with humanity. You're a Typhon. What you've seen is a simulation of the moment where everything went downhill. What's being measured is your empathy. The Typhon are animals. They don't hate, they don't scheme. It's debated in emails and documents and audio logs whether or not they even perceive humans as alive, exactly. Alex is trying to turn that around. By making a Typhon think it's human, will it act in a human manner? Will it demonstrate empathy? The whole game long, you've been graded on your moral performance, secretly, behind the scenes. You even get a breakdown of your more minute choices from robot facsimiles of the characters you may or may not have killed. If you've acted violently and antisocially, they put you down. If you've acted like a human, Alex reaches out his hand and offers to treat you as one. Even if you kill him inside the simulation. Alex says, "I might have killed me too, considering who I was back then." Destroying the Earth humbles a guy, I guess. But you have a last-minute choice. You can take his hand, or you can pass judgment and kill them all. All this focus on the particulars of the characters' lives had two purposes in this hidden frame. One is that it shows dynamically that all of these people were truly human, flawed and blind in ways, brilliant and perceptive in others. Were you moved by them? Even knowing what they all did. That's the other purpose, building a case of evidence against humanity. These were the luminaries. They were the best and the brightest, and they fucked up deeply and committed serious crimes. Do they deserve judgment? The player chooses which tone, which judgment humanity receives, forgiveness or an accounting for our wrongs. The simulation that Alex crafted for his Typhon subject was as much a confession as a lesson. Here is humanity in microcosm, our ambitions, our failures. What comes next? Mechanically, Prey is engaging because of its backwards ambition, because of its powerful belief that simplification does not equate to a larger audience. Narratively, though, Prey is engaging because it taps so directly into a pulsing vein of cultural unease. As we move into the future, will we be able to balance the wonders we achieve with what we can reasonably ask forgiveness for? Thanks for watching. This video and all the other videos I do are made possible by people donating to me on Patreon. I'd like to thank by name some of the people who are currently donating $10 a month or more to make these videos possible. People like Ashley Rain, Erica Mikkonen, Josh Farkas, Morton Scanning, Sing Gustin, Ryan Gunst, NK Jemson, QRayX, Pei, Sean, David Carlson, Spyro Sedaris, Chris Kaon, Evan Hill, Brian Pluckelman, Dewey, Amir Aguilar, Josh, Majaflyer, Galak, Niels Bach-Frummer, Matthew Mason, Brandon Boat, Dirk Warbrol, Chris Larkey, John Paul Harsh, Michael Kunin, Martin Karsten, Tyler Dowsey, Charles Favreau, Carl Gleason, Lassalis, Brynock, Fergus Foley, Cameron Jackson, Tom Vickers, Daniel Pining, Nate Williamson, Antonio Joseph Dovale III, Tim Marsh, Divyeth Faust, Andrew Tapp, Liang Zhao, Colby Howard, Stephen Francisco Santana, Argus Swift, Jonathan Holder, Sorcerer Dave, Yazan Barghouti, Michael Madalewski, Free Morphine, Rich Stower, Noah Duggins, Calyps, Brett Gialmo, Cassidy, I Cannot Fly, Harley McAvoy, Sharif Kazemi, Wesley M., Ray Sawyer, Sudana, Egan Elbray, Simon Nearfolk, Thomas Whitty, Dios, Colin, Daniel Mower-Myrie, The German Snob, Rob Tackett, D. Stex, Nathaniel Garish, Bradley Smith, Ryan Van Dyke, Michael Atwell, Cheryl DeVera, Balder Carlson, Andrew Schiffel, Cameron Booth, Stephen Kreml, Jacob Robertson, Devin Fitzpatrick, Alexander Heavens, Lori Ramey, Joaquin Coleman, Stephen Potyok, Clay Harrington, Philip, Max Wellington, Preston Allen, Brad Carr, Matthew, Jason T. Barnes, Alex Zalato, Carl Clark, Stephen Garrett Day, Jack Dawson, Kyle Hooton, Will Edwards, Robert Glover, Jeanette N., Austin Green, Jonas Martinson, William Davis, Carol Henderson, Jack Harvey, Will Wargrave, Sebastian Tironi, Will Dobbins, Luke Murphy, Twitch, Tom Painter, Oscar Stangenberg, Thomas Paris, Niles D. McDonald, Kim Winson, Devin Vernon, Mike Downing, Jeffrey Knutson, Tyzar Vicarian, Tim Darney, Jody Warren, Kimmo Heikkinen, Medal of Connor, Matthias Hellstrand, Scott Miller, Tim Moon, Aiden AK-47, Andre Bregegair, Joe Hewison, Hercules Johnson, Cy, Alexander Dmitriev, Peter Radusky, Chris Wright, Alexander Afoda, Diller, Jesse Wilkinson, Matthew Sutton, Ricardo Gainda, Lars Ingvar Anderson, Dana Stubkjar, Anthony Bardell, Kevin Schaub, Andreas Larson, Jared Meyer, Andrew Steele, Thunder O'Brien, Nobody, Brian Hill, Lars Braken, Igor Babiuk, Justin Hughes, Alex Forgani, Kumaran Vigian, Casey Pioli, Alexander Leister, World War II Freak, Julius Dean, Eli Bergmass, Dennis Clark, Jake Brennan, Nick Cole Hamilton, Milky Way Resident, Will Hooten, Soaib Sheik, Eddie Burton, Marcus Person, Christian Zacharianson, Gabriel Nichols, Ron Gervais, Comfy Hat, Cassie, and Luke Murphy. Thanks very much, and I appreciate it quite a bit.